Hello. Yo, Harpoon Cannon. How's everything been going, man? Haven't seen you in quite a while. I think I stopped by your stream a couple times over the past couple of months. Oh my god, this is impossible to open. Hold on. But yeah, hope everything's been going well with you. That's awesome, I'm happy for you. Oh yeah, I forgot to add, I was gonna add some DDLC FFZ emotes to the channel, but I forgot. Oh well. I should make this a regular thing. I mean, I do want to start streaming like a little more regularly, you know, maybe like a couple times a week or something like that. Not like DDLC related stuff, but you know, just the stuff that I like to do on stream, like speedrunning and stuff like that. My thoughts on Osumania, I tried it out, like a while back, probably a couple of years ago, and, I couldn't get used to it, like for some reason it felt very different from Stepmania. Felt like, the timing, like, wasn't as good or something like that, and I'm sure that's not the case, but for some reason it just felt different and I couldn't get used to it. That was the first thing. The second thing about it was that, my playstyle in Stepmania requires me to bind multiple keys to the same button, and Osumania did not allow me to do that, and so I was not able to start playing Osumania, largely for that reason. But I still love Stepmania, and that I'm going to stick with that as my main client for 4-button rhythm games for the indefinite future. In case you were not here yesterday, or not until the end, we left off on Chapter 4, which is the weekend, where we go hang out with the character of our choice. It was quite difficult to write those scenes because they are much longer than the normal, like, you know, exclusive character scenes, which is usually just like kind of one thing that happens in the scene. But with the weekend scenes, like, I had to come up with enough interesting stuff to, I don't know, just make it a little bit longer, because it's like now you're like spending some quality time with the girl that you picked, and so it's got to be you know, like worth your while or whatever, and has to get like a little more flirty than usual. I think that, like, between like the reveal with Sayori and like the like trying to romance another girl, like, I don't know, if you like go for Sayori, then you don't really care as much about the scene with the other girl, but like if you're interested in Natsuki or Yuri, then it's like I think I thought it would be pretty interesting to, like, you know, I wanted the heavy hitting stuff with Sayuri to happen first, so that it's like just in the back of your mind when you're going through this stuff with when you're like spending time with Natsuki or Yuri. And I think this is one of my favorite tracks as well, as far as audio goes. I think I mentioned that yesterday too, that I liked this one a lot, but I'm just happy with the way it turned out based on my, or given my like limited skill set as far as music composition goes. I didn't really like trust myself to make like a sad sounding piano song, but the part right here, where it, like, you know, repeats a few notes from the theme song, I liked putting that in too. Just anything that like nods to the theme song that I could do in the various tracks in the game, I think. I just wanted that to just be a highly repeated motif, so when like new feelings are introduced, like with this scene right here with Sayuri's depression, like I wanted that to stick to the notes of the theme song. And then this part right here with like the little bells, that sounds similar to one of the melodies in the poem minigame music, and it's not the exact same notes, but it follows the same general pattern and rhythm, and so I think that's enough to kind of throw back to that motif and make the two related. I think one thing I was afraid of when I was writing this scene was that the lead up to it was like not good enough, I should say, or like not like it wasn't led up to well enough. I was afraid of it just like coming too far out of left field, where it would just be like you know, just random like made up character development or whatever. So I think after I wrote the scene, I actually tried fairly hard to go back and make sure that there were just minor things that like imply her depression, or make sure that it's like sort of gently introduced before this scene actually arrives, because I didn't want it to be like too out of left field and feel like it was just like some conveniently made up thing, if that makes sense. I can see if I can try to make the music a tiny bit louder. Let me see. Or it might just be this track that's low volume, but I don't know. I'll just throw some gain on the track. That should do it. I'll try like a small amount first. Let me know if that's any better. Okay. The thing about like Yuri's tendencies in Act 1, it's like deliberately vague or ambiguous on when or how much Monica starts to like really alter things. I think it's implied that like by the time you're like getting more romantic with the character, Monica is sort of trying to like insert her meddling into the universe. So it's kind of a meaningless question anyway, of like how much of the character is actually that character versus like, you know, what Monica is making of it, because you know, like whatever the universe is presenting at the time, that's just how the character is, and any variable that's changed in the universe would probably change something about the character. So whether that variable is Monica or it's, you know, me developing the game, like it's kind of a meaningless question. It's like the universe is ultimately whatever you want to make of it. Yeah, thinking about it, like, I think it was very difficult for me to feel like I was like leading into this scene properly when I was writing it, you know. There's a point here where Sayori's just like, you know, like giving it to you straight, I have depression. And I was almost afraid of that being like too direct or too easy, and to make it like not really, not as like believable, if that makes sense. But I think in the end, this scene had the effect that I was hoping for, just based on how I've seen like other people reacting to it and stuff like that. There were also certain bits of the scene that I revised like several times, after like, you know, as the scenes around it changed, or after like some playtesting to see like how certain people reacted to it. I did have like, you know, some playtesting before I released the game, so I got some feedback based on that. Because another big part of it was the way that the protagonist like responds to her, because I think that in like a lot of, you know, in like dating sims, the protagonist like always knows like exactly what to say in order to make them feel better or whatever. You know, they just like magically say the right thing, and it's like, I don't know, things are like better magically. But this is a scenario where, you know, if she's literally suffering from depression, then he can't really say or do anything that just like makes it better, you know. She's in a situation where like, she can at most like be comforted in certain ways, but when the protagonist is like responding to her, speaking to her, he is visibly at least a little bit frustrated, because he doesn't understand, he doesn't fully understand her feelings, and doesn't understand exactly what he can like say or do to make it better, you know. It's kind of like, you know, I can be here for you and, you know, give you my support, but like I don't understand why that's not enough, basically. You know, why are you telling me that like me doing that is like, you know, painful in a way? And so like, I think I saw some people playing through it, and they hated the way that the protagonist like responded to her, because he's like making it about himself, or like saying the wrong things. But I think if you don't like, for someone like him who probably doesn't really understand how she's feeling, it would be like so difficult to figure out the right thing to say, if there is a right thing to say. It was really, really interesting to take the tropes that this character often has of like, you know, like waking up late, or caring so much about other people being happy, and like giving it that layer. I think that's something I talked about a little bit yesterday as well, how like I wanted to take these one-dimensional character tropes and like have like a reason for them, you know. Like a little more depth behind the character that makes you like more actually care about them. Yeah, so like, yeah, when the protagonist is like, here when he's like, it feels like I've been betrayed or whatever. Yeah, that's like a really crappy, it's probably a pretty crappy thing to say, but it's probably what the protagonist is actually feeling, because he wants to be there for her, and she's like literally not letting him, It's like if that's what it means to be someone's close friend, to like be there for them, and then she's like literally, shutting him off and not letting him share that part of her life or share the burden, like, that is almost like it feels like you're not being trusted with that. So that's probably like what the protagonist is feeling. It's like that level of like frustration. But she's like, I didn't want to tell you, not because I didn't trust you, but because, like, I don't want anyone to have to worry about it. So yeah, she's like in this, I guess in this trap where, like, she wants everyone else to be friends, and that's, like, what gives her happiness in a sense, but then, like, I don't think it's not until you join the club and start making friends with the other girls that she realizes that she like has feelings for you. And so it's like she can't, like, it's like either path is painful for her, and she probably like she probably hates the fact that she has feelings for you because it's causing that to happen. But yeah, like this one scene is like such a dramatic like change in tone compared to the rest of it that like yeah, I was afraid of it just like sounding too, I don't know, like edgy all of a sudden or something like that. Yeah, the stuffed animals, I don't know, like as soon as I got this background art, like I was like, the stuffed animals are like kind of weird looking, but I guess we'll go with them. I was thinking like, I don't know, maybe some people like comment on it, but it's just like a background element. It's not like really relevant, so it's just like whatever. But like, I don't know, it sort of became like a meme in itself. It took a while, I think it's like after a few months when like, I don't know, people ran out of meme content for the game, they started like finding random stuff like that to start bringing to each other's attention. And I would, what is it? My roommate Alicia, like, she like immediately noticed the weirdness, especially like the bird, how he has that like creepy looking eye that's like staring at you. We joked that there would be memes of like during like the suicide scene, people might make memes of like the scene would happen and then the camera would just like zoom into the bird like slowly. People never did exactly that, but definitely like in kind of people made memes around it, and as soon as we saw that, Alicia was like, "Hi, I told you." I told you that people would notice those. Yeah, so the protagonist is like, whatever it takes for you to stop hurting. He's like saying like the visual novel or like the dating sim stuff. It's like, I'm here for you and like I'll do everything for you. And it's literally just like not working because it's not one of those scenarios. So I think this is like the point where it actually starts. I mean, it's obvious that this is a turning point, but it's the point where it's the point where like the tropey stuff really starts to break, because it's the part where like nothing you say is really working, I guess. Where normally you'd be able to say something that at least has a positive effect, but like there's none of that in this conversation, really. I think I initially wanted a CG here of them hugging, but I ultimately decided to do this because I wanted to save a CG of them hugging for if you accept her confession. I felt like it was more appropriate for that to be like, I don't know, the first time that you see that imagery, so. That scene being one of the only times you see the protagonist, it was necessary to show it from that angle in order to like actually show the scene, you know? Everything else could pretty much be done from first person for the most part. But yeah, that one you actually had to like see the back of his head, so I don't know, you see that in like other dating sims where you almost like never see the protagonist unless the scene actually requires that angle, so then you sometimes see the back of their head or something like that. So I didn't really mind doing that. I didn't really think anything of it. Oh, this is one of the things where that I revised later on, where let's see, he like says this, but then I think initially he was pretty much just like you know, like I have to like, it's like, you know, it's about time for me to like meet up with Yuri, and she's like, okay. And they're like, bye. Not like that simple, but what is it? He did not initially say like maybe I should cancel, but I think during playtesting we were thinking like, you know, he needs to like outwardly be more sincere about like wanting to spend more time with him, because with her, because he does, you know, he's not like trying to get it over with so he can like you know, get with his true waifu. He wants to like, you know, he's torn. It's like, dang, I have this other obligation. So it made sense to make that more clear. So he's like, maybe I should cancel. And then naturally, because of like the way that Sayuri is, she would like really hate for him to do that, because to interrupt plans with someone else, like for Sayuri's sake, is like the thing that she wants the least. And then it made sense for him to like offer for her to come and help out. But you know, she doesn't want to do that either, probably because she doesn't want to there's like probably a couple of reasons. She doesn't want to get in the way of you being close with Yuri or Natsuki, depending on who you pick. And the other reason is probably like she wouldn't be able to face her feelings of heartbreak of like you seeing the protagonist like close with Yuri. So anyway, yeah, like after that revision, like I felt pretty good about where this scene left off. You know, it felt like there was at least a little bit of closure, because he's like, first he offers to cancel, and then he offers for her to come along, and she basically like, in a very natural way, like turns down those options, and he pretty much has no choice but to like leave her, you know. And then he like pushes it to the back of his mind so you can like have all the cute moments with your waifu of choice, and forget about that whole thing. It was so fun to write in just like Yuri's tiny little like awkward mannerisms in like her you know, her interacting with you. It's like you know, like you don't really know how long she's been in front of your house. It could have been like, you know, she could have been there for like 15 minutes for all you know. She could have come early, and then she like didn't text you for some reason because maybe like she was like too anxious and it just like didn't cross her mind. I don't know, just like random stuff like that. And like the way she behaves when she's in your room, how she like randomly like pulls open a drawer, like she's just so like, I don't know, like absent-minded with certain things. It was like so much fun to write. She like offers to you know, she's like, I could have helped you clean your room. It's like, obviously, like, you wouldn't want to do that. And she like, yeah, starts randomly opening a drawer. I don't know. It was, yeah, it was really fun to, get to show, like, more of that side of her. Just, like, the, you know, the awkwardness. I find it very endearing. Yeah, so like the length of this segment, I wanted it to feel, what is it? The planning of this segment was pretty separate from like this thinking about the scene before it, where I wanted the segment to be long enough for doing what I wanted to do, like in the segment itself, of like it being longer than an exclusive scene and having like the right amount of like flirty moments to kind of like lead up to the final bit. That's kind of what dictated the length of these scenes. Essential oils. Yuri does MLM, confirmed. I'm just kidding. She's like the exact person who would never do that. I love giving her the chance to, like, I don't know, like, share more of her interests, you know, because you can tell, like, how happy it makes her to be able to do that. Why did Yuri lick the blood? That itself is kind of a a trope that you see crop up in I don't know, like dating sims or like anime related content. I've seen it more than once where there's an instance where like someone cuts their finger and the other person like licks the blood off or whatever. I don't know. It's like it's so ridiculous, like from our perspective and probably the perspective of many people in general. Like that scene, it's something that would just literally never happen, but it's still in itself like a trope that I've seen more than once, so I thought it would be just a funny thing to include. It's one of those things that's like it's like satire, not because it's like differentiating, or not because it's being more ridiculous than the original content, but the context in which like the game is released or being played, or the culture that it's a part of. Like, it's satire simply because it's like doing that stuff in the first place. I think it's one of those instances. But you know, I tried to include a fair amount of like those sorts of things. It's just like from the perspective of the people playing it, it's just like so ridiculous that they're just like, oh my god, I can't believe, like what game am I playing right now? Hey JM, thank you for stopping by. I've been doing well. Hope you've been well too. I'm still you've still really set the bar with Anime North as far as like accommodation goes, you know? Like just the like how comfortable you and the other staff like made me feel there. I haven't yet had that level of experience at other conventions. So thank you again for that. How many members does your team consist of? It consists of one person, and that is me. Of course, I hired a couple people to do, you know, like the art and stuff like that for DDLC. But aside from like that contract work, like the actual team itself is just me right now. That will likely change in the near future. It's extremely obvious that that the company needs to grow with everything around it. And that's you know, that's been getting pretty important, and so I'm starting to make that change in order to catch up with things. Yeah, this game I did just about everything except for the art. Here it comes. Delicious. Yeah, I did the music too. In college, I majored in IT. I talked a little bit about that last stream, but the gist of it was that IT was like a really good, since I had a lot of experience in IT already, it like made for a good general career path for me to like get a full-time job and make or save some money while pursuing my own hobbies and interests on the side. Sorry, I had something in my throat. I think that's, you know, for something like game development, which is, especially doing like indie stuff, is extremely like risky and difficult to support yourself. I think having that sort of career path is a really good choice for the sake of stability. Music production is something that I just like messed around with as a hobby for like a really long time. So I learned enough to be like somewhat proficient with like producing. My composing skills have always been like pretty lackluster. But since DDLC just required like really simple composition and simple melodies, like I decided that like I would probably be able to get it done. The main theme, I started off with like the simplest chord progression I can think of, or like the most upbeat chord progression, because, you know, this was early on and I was just like, think about like just really generic like dating sim or visual novel like music and stuff like that. So I started with a really simple chord progression, which, like, I don't know, you hear it a lot in music, the do 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 do. I think I think what I originally had in mind was the song Folding Chair by Regina Spektor when I thought of that chord progression. Obviously, the songs sound nothing like each other, but just like I was thinking about you know, just like the upbeat and ridiculously simple nature of those chords and how it uses all white notes on the piano. So I went with that, and I kind of just came up with like a simple melody that felt like was something that was easy to hum and would like get stuck in your head a little bit. I came up with that, like the theme song of the game, before I came up with Your Reality. It was later on that I decided, like, you know, like putting lyrics to it and like using it as like Monica's like end credits song was like a really great way to like kind of wrap up the game and give like more meaning behind the theme song. Oh, baby. I don't play mods for DDLC. I talked more about that last stream, but in summary, it's mostly because it's an area where it's like unfair for me to be involved with the fan community in that sort of way. It could cause some general unfairness. It's something that I really love to see happen, but it's something that I should not have personal involvement in. The game is free because it was more important to me that like certain people who would play it who would never like spend money on a visual novel or a dating sim. I think there are so many people who are just like, it's free and fairly short, so might as well like check it out. Who just like never play these types of games normally. I knew that like that was going to be like half the audience for this game, so I didn't want any sort of price to be like a barrier. Even if it costs $1, that would be enough to like turn a lot of people away. I made this game because I got the idea for it, and I liked the idea enough for it to kind of like, remain in the back of my mind for a while. Until, I eventually found like a decent time to start working on it. The game is just a combination of a lot of things I like. Like anime and making fun of anime and disturbing people. Now, I'm pretty much done with like working on Melee stuff, the most that I'll probably do is if UCF gets updates in the future, then I will update 20xXTE to include those. But I don't really plan on doing like new development for the game. I love seeing people's reactions to like this happening. It was the point at which even people who were like making fun of the game the whole time, like as soon as this happens, they were like, "Oh no!" Like after the previous scene with Sayori, it was just like a lot of fun to see like how people reacted to this. It's such like a cliche moment of drama, like the one girl who likes you, like, you know, seeing you in like a steamy situation with another girl, but like I don't know, it was just fun. Fun to watch people react to that. I love that animation where she just like zooms off the side of the screen. And the music comes back now. Yeah, like this is an instance where like, you know, you probably as the player like wanted to do certain things differently, you know, like if you really care about Sayori, then you wouldn't have let like, you know, Yuri get like so flirty with you or whatever, but you know, the game like doesn't give you a choice. Or maybe like if Sayori didn't interrupt you in that moment, like you could have had the choice to like, you know, push Yuri away or something like that. Like, I already got my waifu. You can't seduce me with like that sweater and luscious purple hair. Yeah, I watched a ton of content creators play this game, especially like the first month after release. It's like what I spent most of my days doing. It was just like so much fun to watch other people play the game and see what they thought about certain things. No, I never thought DDLC would like become as popular as it has. It's something that like is still difficult for me to get a like, you know, get a grasp of to this day. It's pretty crazy. I don't think Game Grumps ever like invited me as a guest because, you know, they never like reached out to me or anything like that. I think they expressed interest in possibly doing so, but they you know, I ended up not, I guess. I don't know. But I would totally be down for that. I talked about yesterday how much I respect them and how much I loved their playthrough. I mean, don't put pressure on them or anything like that. I'm sure, you know, I don't want people to like bug them about it. Like, oh, you know, Dan said this. Like, you know, it's up to them. It's what they feel would be like, you know, what they want to do with their channel. So. Boink. Okay. I said I would go back and do Natsuki, so let's go ahead and do that. No, Mythos, we don't get to that yet. No, it's alright. We can like see how it turns out anyway. I love having like Natsuki or Yuri just like awkwardly trying to cheer the other person up. Oh yeah, like I have periods of time where I'm like watching Twitch like every day, and then other periods where I don't go on Twitch for like a good couple of weeks. I don't know why. I just, you know, that's like in and out. But yeah, what is it? Probably like last month or so, I was pretty much watching ZFG's OOT streams on a daily basis. I like watching him a lot. His knowledge of the game is just absolutely mind-boggling to see, you know. Like, it extends so far beyond, like, the run that he's currently doing that, like, I don't know. Like, you see him mess up, like, a wrong warp setup or whatever, and he's like, alright, like, I guess I gotta do this backup strat. I haven't done it in, like, 4 years, but let me go for it. And it's just, like, he just, like, remembers this, like, all this ridiculous stuff that's, like, probably hasn't been relevant for years, but his breadth of knowledge about the game is just unbelievable. I'm not skipping all the dialogue, I'm just that part was just, I didn't really have much to say about that part. I'm gonna be skipping through this because I literally just did this, and we'll get to Natsuki's scene. Okay. Similar to like how I said it was a lot of fun to write, like, you know, these bits of like awkwardness for Yuri. It was fun to take like the parts of Natsuki's like rambunctious personality and have her be like less defensive because she's not in like a group of people, and more just like you know, like an overall like in a more positive mood, you know. She's like poking fun at you and stuff like that, and letting you poke fun at her. So yeah, it was fun to like put them in a different environment and see how they're like the ways in which their demeanor changes. DDLC took about 1.5 years to make. Oh yeah, the sound effects. A lot of the sound effects I got from like, what is it? Like public domain or zero attribution sources, you know? They're just people who like, you know, just record like random sounds of like household objects and like put them online for that are like free to use. And I found like a good deal of those. And in some cases where I needed like a more novel sound effect for like the horror stuff, sometimes I took like several of those sound effects and like combined them in an interesting way to like get the sound that I wanted, just using basic like audio editing software, you know, like Audacity and stuff like that. But you know, that works because that's oftentimes how people like make sound effects for like games and movies and stuff like that. They take like just sounds of like random objects and that becomes like, I don't know, that's like just how they make those sounds oftentimes. It was such an easy excuse to have like the flirting moments with Natsuki have to do with like, you know, the icing on like getting icing on your face and stuff like that. And again, like the whole like, you know, licking their finger like I did with Yuri. It's just a very like, I don't know, easy tropey thing to do. And I thought that like it's pretty appropriate to have like a little, you know, like some play roughhousing with Natsuki. She seems like the type of person who would do that. So it was pretty natural for that scene. And like you have the random interruption of the fire alarm. That's an instance where it's like, okay, I have to have something like interrupt them there just because that's how this always plays out. So just like come up with, you know, some dumb excuse for them to be interrupted. I'm not cute. Have I had personal experience with their problems? Probably not to the extent that they experienced them, but I think a lot of the inspiration had also come from like me having close friends who have gone through certain similar things, and me like getting an understanding of it, or me wanting to get a better understanding of it based on that. And so a lot of the way that I wrote those aspects of the characters were based on at least based on my indirect experience with those things in those ways. But you know, other various aspects of the characters' personalities, like I drew a good deal of inspiration from my past experiences, or you know, past experiences with friends, and just like understanding like people and their worries and their, like, you know, the way that their social circles work in like high school and stuff like that. I thought a lot about that. Natsuki like has such a hard time believing that people want to like go out of their way to spend time with her. It's so sad. This is of course just about the same as it was with Yuri. And this is the same, so I'll go ahead and skip through this and get to the choice. And no, you don't get to make the choice. Of course I'm going to accept her confession. We went for Sayuri this whole time, and also the other scene is just way too painful, not going through that. I felt so incredibly sad when I was like writing that scene where you turned down her confession. I was like why am I letting people do this? It's like so sad. I just like felt really bad. But of course, like, you know, like the dilemma is, you know, for people who did like Natsuki or Yuri more, it's like, it's arguably even worse if you like, you know, if you like lie to Sayuri about like, you know, saying that you love her. So if people really didn't feel that way and they really did like Natsuki or Yuri more, then like they really do have to choose like the lesser of two evils. It's like you either lie to her or you just like you know, just have to like be honest and turn her down. You know, it sucks. But like one thing I really tried to do was make you feel like you're not really, you know, even if you say you love her, I wanted to like not feel too right, you know, because you know, for the same reasons that like Sayuri like doesn't want people to worry about her or care about her, it's painful in that way for her to like accept you as a romantic partner. You know, it's something that she's like, you know, so afraid of doing, but like her jealousy and heartbreak like pushed her to the point where she like had to do it, I think. She's like, I'm supposed to be happy right now. Why won't the rain clouds go away? The other aspect of it is the point at which you make this decision, like Monica is probably also like wants to push Sayuri to her limits here, you know. And Monica's like not, you know, also probably not letting her be happy. That's another way to look at it. And she's like, even if I get really sad, this is the best thing for me, right? Like, it's very clear that she's like, has like some horrible feelings right now. And she's just like, you know, she like doesn't have control over it. And she's just like kind of desperately hoping that the protagonist like is able to help her. But of course he's not, because that's the point of this game. The point is that like this is you know, it's not the tropey one-dimensional like dating sim. It's like this is a real thing that this person is experiencing, and it's going to work in like, you know, in a much more real way, where you can't just like, you know, magically make a choice and like fix their problems and give them a happy ending. But I think the realization of that, like, that you can't do that, like, only comes in a little bit later, because I try to frame it as if you made the wrong choice, you know? That's, like, really obvious in the writing. Like, the character's practically like, if only I could go back and make the correct choices. Because that's the way visual novels work. You don't get the ending you want, you, like, load your game and you make different choices to try to change it. But that's kind of when the game, like, laughs in your face and doesn't let you do that. It was very intentional to not have music like through this whole like sequence, because I think like it makes it feel weirdly creepy before it actually gets creepy, if that makes sense. I think it's the very first time in the game where there's like no music for like an extended period of time, instead of just like the music stopping for a dramatic effect like here and there. Like, this is where like there's actually ongoing scenes where there's just no music playing. You know, and some people are like, is that like a bug, like where's the music or whatever? But I think like this whole thing, it just makes it feel a little bit creepy before anything actually goes down. And actually, let's go back. Let's like pay a little more attention to Monica's dialogue. So, of course, the protagonist says something like extremely dense there, but then he's like, oh yeah, like I'm just used to thinking that way. Like, it was actually like terrible for me to say. And he's already second guessing himself. You should take a little responsibility, especially after your exchange with her yesterday. Let's just make our way past that line. Well, I mean, that's actually, never mind. It's kind of important, right? Because the whole point of Monica like saying these things is that it's a complete role reversal, where Monica is not taking the game seriously because it's just a game. So she's literally like making fun of like all the horrible things that are going on, right? In the way that oftentimes like the player of a game would, you know, like people who like play The Sims and they like, you know, they like kill them off in really funny ways or whatever, and they just like make fun of like this, I don't know, this horrible suffering that happens in video games. You know, when I was a kid and we played The Sims, like I would remember like, you know, like my friends or whatever, like, just like doing these, you know, doing these horrible things to them, like trapping them in rooms and like removing the ladder from the swimming pool and like watching them drown. And it was like so funny to them, but I just like, I felt so horrible like watching that, you know. It was like really like heartbreaking and like sad to me, despite that game obviously being nothing about like, you know, like the characters' emotions. It was just like that stuck out to me so much. And you know, I think it was from that point, like thinking back on that made me start evaluating the relationship that like people have with the games and the characters, you know, and how certain games like make you feel empathy for the characters, and other games you're literally just like, it's just a game, so you're gonna get over it and it doesn't matter. So I thought it would just be a really interesting role reversal for Monica to be making fun of like their misery and being like, it's just a game, it doesn't matter, because that's literally how she's feeling at this point. And she's expecting you, the player, to feel the same way because you're literally playing this game. But you don't, because if you're playing like, you know, a visual novel or a dating sim, it's likely for you to have like be caring about the characters and you wanting the best for them. Monica doesn't really understand that. So in a sense, she's like more detached than you are. And that's why she's like making these horrible comments and like just kind of laughing about like the horrible things that are going on. That's really what I was going for with that sort of behavior. I probably know a lot more than you think. Another thing about like music not playing during this part, I think the use of silence, I think I was probably partially inspired from Tsukihime, because there was like a lot of that. There were like a lot of tense moments where there was silence, and whether it was like a smart creative decision or it was simply because there was like not enough audio tracks in that game to like, you know, have music everywhere, but like there was like really strong use of silence in certain scenes in Tsukihime that stuck out to me and made me like, gave me that creepy feeling when you're like so used to hearing music. And so I think that like that was probably one of the feelings I was remembering when I was like making that decision to not have music in this scene, you know. And like when this poem comes up, it's like it like deserves silence when this happens, you know. And I really like this line too. A poem is never actually finished; it just stops moving. You know, I think it's not like I think it's basically, you know, you hear people say things like a painting is never actually finished, or like a so and so, like a creative work is never actually finished. It's just like whenever you are no longer working on it. It's kind of like that, but it's just like a lot more morbidly phrased. It was interesting, like seeing different people going into this scene, like expecting different things, you know. A lot of them knew early on what was going to happen, and other people like just thought that, like, you know, like, oh, like the game is trying to scare you, but this type of game would never do that, and so they didn't think it would actually happen. And it kind of like fakes you out several times. It's like first he goes in the house, and then like he knocks on the door, and it like takes forever for it to actually happen. Well, here we go. I spent like quite a long time designing the scene, like the various effects and, you know, the way it syncs with the music. I was really like I didn't know what sort of effects that it would have on people. Something I was constantly afraid of when making this game was that it was not creepy enough, or it was not disturbing enough. Like since I didn't have the same perspective, since I was the one making the game, I didn't know if the effect would be there. I could only just do my best to try to make it happen. So, you know, that's kind of what was going through my mind, I think, when I was designing the scene. I was just like, I can do my best and hope that it's effective. A couple other things, I guess, regarding this scene. So I'm actually gonna roll back for the purpose of talking about it. Yeah, so the fact that there's no music and hardly any sound for this entire chapter until like the jarring sort of jump scare noise. I talked a little bit about it last stream too, but yeah, the decision to have that sound effect when you like view the scene is something that like something that you could do either way, because you can like have the sound effect to like to immediate like to add more gravity to the add more gravity to it right away, or you could like not have the sound effect and let the realization slowly creep in. Like I would be okay with doing it either way, and like, you know, it's going to give different people different experiences depending on how it's done. But one thing that it does in its current form is, you know, this is the turning point in the game where it starts to break rules, right? Because I spent the entire first act establishing how things work, from the structure of the game to how you as a player interact with it, right? This is the very first instance where the game does something without you clicking to advance, right? Because you click and the dialogue starts appearing, but it's all of a sudden interrupted by the scene. And that itself is a decision that's separate from like, should it or should it not be like a jump scare, you know? That's like the first rule that I decided to break in the game, was that things can happen when you don't click for them to happen. So that was very deliberate. When I was working on like the animation and stuff for this scene, I was there was a time where I was like working on it in an airport, and I had to like keep looking over my shoulder to like make sure no one was like you know, seeing like this like ridiculous imagery on the screen, or this horrible imagery of like a, you know, a character like committing suicide over and over. The visual effect here, like, I spent a long time playing with like the, you know, the color levels and stuff like that, and like there's like some blurriness when Sayori's like moving around, and I did that by taking a half transparent version of the same image and delaying its animation by like a, you know, by half a second or something like that, and so every time she moves it like blurs a little bit. It was a simple and effective way to achieve that. And that's the other rule that's broken here, is that like there is like all of a sudden there's like movement and animation, you know, and the whole screen is doing stuff. That's also something that like the game has not nearly done to that effect. At the most, it's been like a character, just like kind of a character animating, and not like the camera shaking or like, you know, stuff, you know, the entire screen having visual effects. This music was, I'm trying to think back to when I was designing this music. I definitely drew some inspiration from, I remember the feelings I had when I finished playing Yume Nikki, and I experienced that ending. For some reason, like, I mean, my playthrough was more or less blind, and I used, like, a spoiler-free guide to finish the last, like, 10 or 20% of the game, but I didn't expect the ending. But I just remember, like, it happening, and up until the very last point where I was, like, on the balcony, I didn't know what I was making the character do until she did it. And, I just, like, felt so horrible, and, like, the music that came in, and how it was, like, so different sounding from the rest of the game's soundtrack. Like, I remember the feelings I was having when I went through that. And I think I wanted to go for some similar feelings here. How it's just like, the music is kind of like sparse in its notes, and it's like creepy sounding, and just like, you know, makes you feel horrible, I guess. And then this whole thing, right, where the protagonist is like, what did I do wrong? I mean, this is probably pretty obvious, but I'm trying to tell the player, you did something wrong, and, like, you can go back and make the right decisions. And whether or not you know, if you confess to her, if you turn down her confession, he's going to say something different here. He's like, confessing to her must have been what I did wrong. I shouldn't have done that. It wants you to go back and, like, you know, load that save and make the different choice. And for people who didn't want to stomach the remainder of this scene, you know, like, if they just wanted to, if you're like me, like, and you have, like, a lot of empathy for these sorts of situations, it just, like, hits you too hard, and you, like, you don't want to, you, like, can't stand, like, being immersed in it for this long, and it's like, okay, like, I don't want this horrible thing to happen, so let me, like, quickly, like, load my game and, like, do something else instead, you know? I think that's, like, sometimes when I have, like, played visual novels, I was, like, quick to do that because I, like, couldn't stomach what I ultimately caused to happen by making those choices. So I, like, this whole thing, I, like, you know, I dragged out pretty far because I was hoping that certain players would not wait for this scene to end before going back and loading their game. Because, of course, if you, like, try to load your game here, that's when it doesn't let you load your game and it, like, forcibly starts a new game. You can either do that, or you can reach the ending and it takes you back to the title screen, and the new game text is, like, garbled, and it kind of entices you to click on it to see what'll happen. That was another thing I added, like, later on in playtesting, because there were a couple people who thought that this is where the game ended, because it just took you back to the title screen, and they there was nothing that immediately grabs them to try to, like, load their game or start a new game, you know? And especially for, like, non-visual novel players, they're just like, oh, well, that's the end. And they didn't want to go do that. And so it made me feel like I needed that extra bit of, like, that extra nudge to tell them that the game is not yet over. And so I added the, like, the garbled new game text to help indicate that. Oh yeah, and what is it? Sayori being glitched on the title screen. That normally, originally, that did not happen until, like, you're, like, one chapter into Act 2. So it was like, the farther you got into Act 2, like, kind of the glitchier the game would get outside of it. But you know, I realized that, one, for, again, nudging the player that something was different, and two, for the sake of continuity, because, like, her character file was deleted, it, like, made sense to just do that right off the bat. Yeah, so, of course, this is where it actually, you know, the scene actually ends. Another thing that I changed in, like, a more recent update was, if you tried to quit the game during this scene, it gave you like a little scare of like this dialogue box looked messed up. But I later I later thought about it, and I was thinking like that is actually like slightly too cruel, because most likely if people are actually trying to quit the game during this scene, it is because like they emotionally are not able to handle it, and it's unfair to like make fun of them for trying to quit the game because of that, you know. I think that like that's actually approaching an area that's like wrong from like a moral standpoint. It's a very small detail, and that's why I like didn't really pay much mind for a long time until like I started, you know, thought more about it and like more recently, and that's like why I changed that in a recent update. The coding behind like what is it? There's like a lot of stuff in code that happens like, you know, right when the scene presents itself. You know, it creates a file in the game directory, which is like the error file. It like, you know, deletes Sayori's character file. It shifts the game the playthrough variable into Act 2. Or actually into Act 1.5 technically, because there's that in-between where you start the new game, which has like the messed up Sayori before it again restarts itself into actual Act 2. And during this Act 1.5, that's when you experience like the inability to like load your game. So I see like a lot of people on Twitch and YouTube not go back and try to load the game because they obviously, if you're doing a playthrough for Twitch or YouTube, you want to finish reading everything, and then it takes them back to the title screen, and then the garbled new game text grips them before they go back and try to load a save. And so, so a lot of playthroughs I've seen, they haven't actually tried to do that, but like let's go ahead and do that here, where you know, try to load your save, tells you the character file is corrupt or missing or corrupt, and then right from here, even before you go back to the menu or anything, it just tells you the save file is corrupt, and as a fail-safe or whatever, the game just like starts a new game instead. And already like the music is already a little bit messed up. I tried to, like, I was afraid here when people like hit that point where they try to load and it's like starting a new game. I was afraid that people would be like, oh no, I don't want to start a new game, and they would like back out or they would quit or whatever. So I tried to have as many indicators like right on screen 1 that something was wrong. 1 was of course the messed up text at the bottom, and 2 was like the music started doing something weird, you know, just enough to entice the player to like go a little bit more forward and see like what would happen, you know, just to, you know, help them understand that there's like more stuff. There were you know, and that was also, you know, probably some of those details were probably tweaked like during playtesting as well. There were, you know, 1, maybe 2 people who like during playtesting thought that the game was actually glitching out, and it was like a problem with their game files, and they had, you know, because I mean they have like the IT mindset, and so they thought that the game was like actually corrupted, and one of them I think at that point actually like reinstalled the game or tried to fix the problems. And I was like, okay, I really hope this is like an outlier, because that's like not the experience that I'm going for, you know. But that also kind of told me that I need to make it a little bit more obvious that like the game is like supposed to be doing what it's doing, which is unfortunate because like I don't know, there's a balance there between like making it feel like actual bugs in the game versus like letting the player know that they should keep going. My experience as a ROM hacker, well, the thing is, most of the work that I've done has been for like GameCube and Wii games, you know, like the Smash games and things like that, and they don't experience the same sort of corruption that like NES games do, for instance, and Super Nintendo games. But you know, it's still very easy to draw inspiration from, like, you know, when something goes wrong in an NES game. Just the way the video memory works. You don't have to be a ROM hacker to like have, you know, a cartridge tilt scenario where things start to like really glitch out and like text is like replaced with other random sprites or like garbles up in certain ways. So that definitely served as like a bit of an inspiration, you know. And that stuff is like, you know, is like really creepy when it happens and you don't expect it. Like, I remember I got an email from someone who said that their fear has always been of like computers like doing unexpected things and like glitching out and like doing weird stuff. And I was like, wow, I relate to that so much because I have weird memories of like just like on old machines, right? What is it, like sometimes you're playing like a DOS game and like the sound gets crackly and messed up, or the computer just blue screens out of nowhere, or like you get it, like, you know, you're in the middle of a game and all of a sudden it's like instant silence and you get an error message, just like while you're like playing in the dark or whatever. That's like so creepy. And even beyond that, I used to play on an Amiga computer, a Commodore Amiga. It was like my family's first computer, and I'm extremely fond of it still. It's actually right over here behind me. But the Amiga has really loud disk drives, as like a lot of old computers do, right? And so when you're playing on the Amiga, when you're like loading games from the disk, it makes these like really jarring grinding noises. And the noises always sound different depending on what disk you're loading or what game you're playing. And when there's a disk read error, it like makes extra grinding noises before the error message pops up because it's like trying several times to like read the disk. It's like so creepy when you're just in silence and you're trying to play the game and all of a sudden the disk like starts grinding up and down. You know, and it was a system I played, you know, I'm thinking when I was like 4 years old, you know, like when I was like a little kid and I was playing these games, those were the things that I was experiencing, and they like creeped me out. I think there was definitely like a good deal of inspiration that came from that. Another example was when I was playing Riven on old machines. Riven originally came on 5 CDs, and as you like move to different areas in the game, you'd have to like put different CDs in to like load that area, right? And so what the game would do is like you travel to another area, the game would go silent, and then your disk drive would just pop out and it would say please insert disk 4 or whatever, but the disk drive would like eject automatically, and in that sense, like it felt like the game was like breaking the fourth wall a little bit. Of course it was just like a convenient feature that it would automatically eject itself, but like when I was like 8 years old and experiencing that, it was like so creepy to me, you know, because the game already had like a creepy atmosphere, and like it was all this just the tiniest bit, it was like leaving the game, and I always like got so tense in anticipation of the disk drive popping out, you know, just to like try to get past it and like move on with the game. Yeah, this was like a really long rant, but those sorts of experiences, like I've had a long history with and have been, you know, very meaningful to me, and they definitely influenced in some way or another the development of certain effects in this game, because like that's the sort of thing that I was hoping to go for. They are things that you don't nearly as much experience on modern hardware, of course, because when things go wrong, they go wrong much more elegantly. So that's like a sort of creepiness or fear that I think is almost going to be lost when you know, in newer generations or whatever. I'm gonna roll back here. This was another interesting effect because this was the first time in Ren'Py that I was needed to exhibit like stronger control over the music. So this effect, if you have ever played an old Source Engine game, or I should say maybe pre-Source, I don't remember if Source does it, but if you if you've played Half-Life 1 or the old Counter-Strikes 1.6 or 1.5, the way the audio buffer would work is if the game locks up or if it's loading, it would take the last half second of audio and loop it, right? Just the sound effect or like the footstep noise, that's what it would do. Or of course, if the game crashes, it would do that too. And so that specifically was something I remembered from those old source or pre-source engine games and was another one of those kind of creepy things that I wanted to do in this game. And so I used some, Ren'Py game engine trickery to create a new audio track by looking at the position of the current track, starting a new audio track half a second before that or a third of a second before that, and creating like that short loop. So no matter where you are in the audio track, it always skips the current like fake audio buffer. So that was like a really fun effect to create as well. I'll be right back. Gotta use the bathroom real quick. As long as I pause for a second, I really want to show you like what this disk drive sounds like on the Amiga, just real quick, and you'll like completely understand why I was so like creeped out by it when I was a kid. It's like really loud. Let me see. Let me mute that real quick. I'm gonna turn the gain up on my microphone and go ahead and turn this system on so you can hear it. How did you like that? Yeah, I love that computer, but I just really wanted to share that. So imagine being 4 years old and that being your first experience with a computer. Yeah, let's move on a little bit. Yeah, this is another instance where, what is it? Act 2 is starting in the game. I was afraid that people would, like, think that it's kind of the same thing again and they would just, like, click through the dialogue, you know? So I tried to, within the first, like, 3 lines, indicate that something was different. And of course, the protagonist says, "I've always walked to school alone." You know, I figured that would be enough for them to be like, "Oh my god, like, we are not, like, you know, there's no more Sayori." So, and some people got it right away. Other people, like, they, like, weren't sure yet until, like, you know, maybe partially through the first chapter when there's, like, no reference to her. Monica says there's only 3 club members, and they're like, "Oh my god, she's, like, actually gone," you know? You know, I mean, it's kind of cruel what I was going for, where I kind of made the player feel like it was their fault that Sayori did what she did, and then even if you want to go back and make the different choice, the game does not let you. It kind of laughs in your face and says that you have to, like, live with the consequences, you know? Like, this is not, you know, you can't just magically go back and give yourself a happy ending. And so, you know, I tried to, like, as I was making revisions to this chapter, like, I wanted to add, just, like, a little bit more, like, creepy effects here and there to help indicate that, like, the game is still messed up and it's not normal anymore. Because for people who are not a fan of, like, normal visual novels or dating sims, they've just, like, spent an hour or two, like, playing through a completely normal game, and I want to reassure them that it is no longer that, and that they are, like, you know, getting to the good stuff or whatever. So that's kind of for those players, I think. Like, this is one, for instance. This is in effect the sort of screen, like, the screen tearing effect that I use a pretty good amount as a visual effect. Probably part of the reason is that Ren'Py makes it quite difficult to manually create, like, visual effects on the screen. You know, it's extremely easy to change images or add animations or add, like, new objects or sprites to the screen, but I had a pretty hard time, like, taking what was on the screen and making visual changes to it. You can't, like, create, like, a pixel shader, you know, or, I mean, I don't even have much, like, graphics, what is it, like, graphics API experience, but if you can do stuff like that, like, on a GL level, then it's just very difficult to do and, like, beyond my scope of knowledge. But Ren'Py does have some programmatic ways of modifying, like, a canvas, or at least a sprite. And so I think for those sorts of effects, what I did was I used programming, and I don't know if this is Ren'Py or it might be an extension of Pygame that Ren'Py like allows you to use. But yeah, I effectively took, like, a screenshot, added it as another image on top of the normal screen, and then I was able to you know, use some code to, like, chop it up or do interesting stuff with it, as long as you know, as long as it was within the bounds of the SDK and was within my skill level to do so. So it was, like, quite challenging to do stuff like that, and I would have liked to do more interesting manipulation, but it was just very difficult for me to do. So I was able to do kind of just enough to you know, make, like, a few interesting visual effects, but I wasn't able to, like, go crazy with it. I wanted to add that too, like as she says, a literature club, just to make the introduction of the club itself a little more ominous this time around. You know, but another thing about these effects is as they happen, the player has no idea when or how they're going to happen, and so like it becomes, especially as they play like through the first couple chapters, it becomes a really tense and anxious experience just to click through the text, because you have no idea when something unexpected is going to happen. And so in that sense, even when everything is completely normal in the game, you still feel like this tension and anxiety, because you know that like the rules are now out the window and the game can more or less do whatever it wants, and you don't know when or how that's going to happen. So it just causes that anxiety. Like, you know, I've seen like a couple people play through it where like they're like visibly scared to like just continue clicking through the text and like making like so many pauses and stuff like that, because they just don't know when the next thing is going to happen. You know, the other interesting thing in that regard is things that are not normally like jump scares have an effect similar to jump scares, where you're like you feel that kind of uncomfortable tingle and your heart starts to race when these things happen, because even though something's not like screaming at you in your face, when your mind is in the routine and it expects one thing to happen and something unexpected suddenly happens, whether it's like an unexpected visual on the screen or an unexpected like note in the audio, it has like a similar effect, despite it not literally trying to jump out and scare you. So that's something that I partially discovered myself, because when I was playtesting this game, I actually forgot about certain effects that I added. And so like when they happened unexpectedly, I felt like, you know, they startled me when they happened. And I was just like, oh my God. So, you know, I would say this right here, this effect, is probably one of the closer things to what you would call like a jump scare, because it is a, it's like a flash on the whole screen. It's like a loud-ish sound effect. I try to balance the sound effect to be about as loud as the audio, so it's not like screaming, as the normal audio, so it's not like screaming at you. But I think the reason I decided to include that was, again, to like really insert that tension and anxiety, like so that you can't shake the feeling, you can't shake the anxious feeling that like something different is going to happen that's like going to startle you, despite it. After this, it doesn't really happen, I don't think, for the rest of the chapter. Like nothing really startling happens, but those couple effects like really insert that tension in there. And the other basis for that effect was, again, when I was messing with code level image manipulation in RenPy. One of the initial effects that I coded was inverting the screen colors, like making it a negative, and so that was an opportunity for me to use that effect as well. And I think I was probably hoping on using it a little bit more here and there, but that's just the one instance in which I used it. Like here it is again. Yeah, the screen, like it basically takes a screenshot and inverts the colors and displays it. And the other part of the effect is it's once again something that doesn't happen when you click. It happens about half a second after you click. And so it feels like it's not something that you are instigating. It's something that the game just like does aside from your own control. So probably around half the dialogue in this chapter is like the same as the first playthrough, and a lot of people actually just kind of like skipped through this, or at least clicked very quickly through it, which I don't really blame them for doing, because for people who do more want to get to the point, there is a lot of redundancy. But if you do take the time to read it, there are some just interesting differences in the dialogue, right? The first one being right here, where it's like, I'm confident that we can all grow the club before we graduate, and in Act 1 everyone was like enthusiastic about it, but this time around Natsuki's like, well, I guess so. She like doesn't really care. Because that ends up, I think I made that change because that ends up becoming a point of contention like later in this storyline, where everyone has like different ideas of like what they want the club to be, and like it causes some drama. And I think yeah, never mind. I think this is like the same as the first act. Let's see. This is the same, but I mean, this has some more context now, so it's pretty funny to like read it a second time in retrospect after like everything that's going on in this game. But here's the difference, right? When Yuri mentions that she reads horror, in Act 1, Monika's like, oh, I wouldn't expect that from you, Yuri. And in Act 2, now she's saying, I would expect that from you. It suits your personality. So that's another like interesting difference. This is all just about the same. I think 1 without Sayuri here, and 2 just because it like some of it's repeated. I removed some pieces of dialogue from this time around. Here's another interesting thing that I didn't bring up. So when the characters, as the different characters talk, how they sort of come into the foreground, and then when they're done talking, they go back into the background. That's all stuff that like, what is it? I could not find a good way of automating that in Ren'Py, where having a character's sprite animate in a certain way when it's that character who's speaking the dialogue. I think it is possible to do, but like looking into it, I decided that like it couldn't really be done in the way that I wanted it to specifically. So there is in the script, there's a line in the script for every single piece of dialogue where a different character is talking, where I have like a script that says to animate one character coming out and animate the other character coming in. That's something I had to do like in between almost every single line of dialogue in the script. So you can imagine that itself being fairly tedious to do. However, and to go along with that, I had to change the Z order of each character sprite, which indicates like how far, like which sprites go on top of each other, right? Because the character in front needs to go in front of the other sprites, because it doesn't make sense for them to like zoom in a little bit and then to still be behind like the other sprites. So they always had to pop in front. And it was just like, that's all stuff I basically had to script by hand. But I created some AutoHotkey scripts to help with that. AutoHotkey is like a macro program that basically lets you write mouse and keyboard macros. So for instance, you like hit a button on your keyboard and it like types something in for you, stuff like that. And so I created a bunch of shortcuts that was like, where I could like type just 1 or 2 keys and it would like fill in the script line for me in order to speed up that process a little bit. But yeah, that was just some of the more tedious work that was involved in creating this script. Why not use behind rather than Z order? Because when using Z order, I know which Z order number means in focus in front of everything else, you know. So it's like I think I had Z order 2 as the default, and then Z order 3 was like in focus. But when you use behind, you have to specify what they are going to be behind or in front of, you know. So I think like, you know, when they fade out, you have to say behind all of the other characters, and it's like it's just a little bit messier than just saying like Z order 2. But that you know, that detail, like the kind of the animation of them coming in focus, and like the you know, them kind of just like moving around, kind of sinking or hopping, stuff like that. Those were all things that I just, you know, I was trying to make the game feel, just trying to add those little details to make the game feel overall a little bit better, you know, like a little bit more professional. Those were probably inspired by, or that sort of animation, because you know, you don't see that in like a lot of visual novels really. You see it in some, but like probably most of them that you play, you don't see that. But it was a piece of detail that I noticed in Love Live School Idol Festival. When I was like, you know, playing through the visual novel aspect of that, and I was like, this feels really nice to just have that extra bit of animation and emotion in the characters. That's something that I want to do in my game. So that's what I did. But I think it helps a lot to have those sorts of animations, just, you know, the focus and the way that they kind of fade in and fade out when they enter and leave the scene, stuff like that. I think it helps. Oh, and of course, this time around, like, in order to convince the protagonist to join the club, Monica's like kind of guilts him, like, we don't have enough members, so like, please help us. It's a little bit different. It's like right off the bat, Sayori's not around, so Monica is already like getting a little bit more of a chance to speak directly to the protagonist. So she's already trying to be like a little bit more like flirty, or trying to get his attention more. The special poems were really fun to add. It was another instance where when it comes up, I think it just in the context of what's going on in the game, it feels very creepy. You know, even though there's like nothing inherently creepy about this, it is breaking the routine. There was never an instance where something different happened between the end of a chapter and the poem minigame. And so it's kind of like all of a sudden, and there's no music, and it's just like this dialogue box, and that's it. I think, like, it instantly, there's like some creepiness to it. And it was a lot of fun to, you know, these little pieces of text, or interesting poems, about either the characters or other stuff about the game, or, you know, whatever, that didn't have a place anywhere in the actual game. I loved being able to incorporate them in these special poem scenes. And the other thing that this does, of course, is there are a total of, I think, 10 different special poems, but you only get 3 of them in a given playthrough. And I loved the idea in DDLC of everyone getting like a slightly different experience. I think that once again drew some inspiration from Yume Nikki, because I remember, reading a lot about just, some of the effects that Yumeniki did, where like there's only a chance of something happening, or specifically the game is like so vast that it's almost impossible for one single person without any guide to like find absolutely everything in the game. So I read about how kind of in the mid 2000s when the game came out, people were like on forums and they were like sharing their experiences with the game that like other players didn't have, and although I didn't live through that because I didn't play Yumeniki until much later, the idea of that, it being like sort of a collaborative experience in that way where people get to like share the thing that happened to them in the game, that idea like was really enticing to me and was something that I wanted to try to do a little bit with DDLC. And so that's where a lot of the inspiration came from, different things like happening in different playthroughs. And the special poems was like one way of doing that. And it also provided like a minor incentive to replay the game. I didn't really like design the game around having like really heavy replay value, but for people who really enjoyed the game, I wanted them to be able to like replay it and experience some different things. This special poem, I probably won't go into like full detail with all of them because some of them are just like really deliberately cryptic and ambiguous, but this one was written from their perspective of Monica, because this is around the time where Monica is really starting to experiment with like mortality in her universe. And she's like so casual about the whole thing because at this point she feels so detached from the universe that she's in that it's almost like it doesn't really matter to her anymore, and the feeling of her like feeling physical pain or doing that sort of thing to herself, she describes it as exhilarating because it's something that is her allowing her to feel something in this universe that has become so incredibly meaningless to her. So that's what this one was about. I'm not going to take a poll for these. I'm just going to go for Natsuki because there's technically a little bit more content to experience when going for Natsuki. So I'm just going to go for Natsuki in these scenes so we can kind of get those. Here's, of course, one of the random events that happens, but this one, what is it? The background that I use in these scenes, in Act 2, the classroom background is always a modified background that says that there's a 1 in 6 chance, I think, of that appearing, and so it's almost guaranteed that in any given playthrough, that is going to appear like at least once. But it's just up to like how long it's going to be there and if they have the chance of noticing it, So it's always going to be there in like different times in any given playthrough. And the other stuff that I added here was like, the music is slowly speeding up by 1 half tone throughout the loop, and also the screen is just really, really slowly tilting and slightly zooming in here, and so those effects are, again, like types of effects where, like, especially when you're when you're looking at other things that are going on, like the dialogue, and that could be affected with Yuri's face, and the way that Natsuki comes in here, like the music and like the background, like the what is it, the camera, like they feel like off, but you might not be quite sure like what's off about them. This was fun to do as well, making Monica like appear in front of the text like that. Yeah, this makes me feel dizzy too. It's so slow. It's because it's so incredibly slow that your eyes can't track the motion, but you know the motion is there. And so it like gives you this like a really dizzy feeling. But I kind of like that. And that like snaps back to normal all of a sudden. Which I decided to do because, what is it? If you are reading very quickly and you don't spend that much time on that scene, then you actually don't notice the screen tilt. But then when it snaps back to normal like that, that's something that you always notice, because even if you quickly go through that scene, it's tilted enough that it will snap back. This is a pretty famous line, right? Yeah, it was fun and interesting to replace like random lines with this messed up font to as kind of an indication that like Monica is directly trying to manipulate the dialogue in order to make the characters less appealing in certain ways, you know? Like using swear words or like saying other horrible things. So in this instance, like she is probably just not very good at it yet and is like, you know, like messing up, and that's why the text like appears kind of glitchy. It was also fun to have those instances and then go back in the history and it being like the normal text. Sometimes the history is the normal text and sometimes it's the modified text, just based on whatever my preference was for the scene. But yeah, that had to be hard-coded too, where I would have a few lines of code where the text would appear and then I would access the history list object in RenPy, and I would delete the last history line and manually add a history line of like the normal dialogue. That was, of course, just another instance of that. Yeah, the normal line is, of course, don't judge a book by its cover. But the other interesting thing is, what is it? The text automatically advances onto the black text. Like you, from this line to the next line, you don't have to click in order for it to advance. And it's once again an instance of something happening that is not prompted directly by the player's click. Also, during this exclusive scene during Act 2, there were some bits of the dialogue that I removed compared to the Act 1 version, so it like progresses a little bit more quickly. I really love this CG, by the way. This actually did like such a good job with it. It's probably one of my favorite ones. I love all this facial expressions for it too. So we can once again infer that like Monica is trying really hard to make Natsuki like appear messed up in certain ways to the player as to make them like uncomfortable around her. You know, but it's like really direct. It's very deliberately designed to make the player feel uncomfortable. This visual effect was really fun to make. You know, a couple aspects. One, the audio track. I just had a completely separate audio track for this effect, and so I just switched it over on the fly to the other track on the same position. The second being a modified font to make it look, you know, it is actual text, but the font is black, and then it has like strong black outlines, so it just looks like garbled blocks to match her eyes and mouth. And this was really fun to make too. Ren'Py has like a good kind of system where you can create like particles of like custom size and specifications, and so I was able to create like particles of like black rectangles of random widths and heights, and just do that a bunch of times every frame. So I created kind of like a black particle cluster object, and added one of the correct size on each eye and on the mouth, and you know, I had like enough variables that I can control to like get the look correct on that part. So that was like a lot of fun to make, you know. It was effects like that where like as soon as I was done making them, I like recorded it and I like showed it to all my friends. I'm like, yo, check this out. That's how I kind of like, you know, that's how I held myself over when making this game for like a year and a half without talking about it in public to anybody, you know. I just like showed my friends the stuff that I was working on, and that was, you know, enough to keep me motivated. I think the history is actual, yeah, the history is like the actual garbled text, and the font is still black here. I guess, what is it? Ren'Py uses the same font in history that the text was appearing as at the time, or not font actually. It's always using the same font for history, but I guess it remembers the text color, which is kind of funny there. That of course doesn't need to be patched. It's like inconsequential. All of the poem stuff in this chapter is the same as in Act 1, except for Monica, of course. So there's like nothing interesting about that. Even the poems that Natsuki and Yuri share are the same. I was thinking about adding some more differentiating stuff, but like, for one, like I couldn't really come up with things that were justifiably different, unless it was like just for the sake of being different, and also like it was just would have required like a fair amount of work. And I was trying to like already limit the scope of the game to make sure I would get it done, so it was just something that I didn't really feel the need to add. And if you've like already seen it, then there's not really much of a problem with just clicking through it if you don't want to read it again. Might as well hit skip. Yeah, until of course we get to Monica, and she kind of starts off the same, but we don't have the skip button available because it's a entirely separate block of dialogue in the code in the script. And then of course Monica says some like really messed up things about Natsuki. And again, like, you know, this has to do with the whole thing I explained before, where I was going for Monica not taking the game seriously because it's just a game, and she mistakenly thinks that the player sees it as the same way, where it's like okay to just like make light of it, when like most likely that's not okay at all, and it's just like making the player feel really uncomfortable. Yeah, Monica's poem is different here too. This is like part 2 of her first hole-in-wall poem, where you put the two together and it like kind of finishes the story. And it's very obvious after the fact what the poem is about. It's about her like having her first glimpse into the universe outside of her own, and it causing like her own perspective of her universe to like fall apart. And I guess this is the this piece is the same as in Act 1 as well. This scene with the argument. Oh yeah, I forgot the notes are a little bit different there. That was fun. Seeing some people stream and they're just like, wait, did the music just like mess up? They're like not paying attention to it, but then they just note it's like there's like 1 or 2 like wrong notes, and they're like not sure if it's actually messed up, and those are the only wrong notes, and even after the music loops, it's back to normal again. So it's only something that you get to hear once. So this is all the same, of course, as Act 1, up until, you know, the argument starts to escalate. 1, because Sayuri is not here to help defuse it, and 2, because, like, you know, Monica is causing it to escalate to the point where, you know, to make sure that you like the characters a little bit less based on the horrible things that they're saying. So here's the other thing about this, right? I spent a long time on the music, specifically the musical effect on this scene. So the track that you hear right now, it is not the full version of this track. It actually only loops the first half of the track over and over, because that's the only way to make it seamlessly transition into the modified version of the track, which starts right here. But it only actually starts, you know, once it like hits the proper loop point, and it makes sure that the previous track seamlessly transitions into the next part. I'm gonna like back up just so I can talk about that a little bit more. So that ultimately ended up being quite difficult to pull off, because there were like a lot of variables that had to do with like the position of the audio, because when I click and go to the next part, I have to like log the position of this audio, you know, calculate the time between like when it's going to next loop, and start both the next audio track and and delay the visual effects that exact amount of time to make sure that it like stays synchronized with the audio. It was all like fairly meticulous to like pull that stuff off, but it was like that made it, you know, all that much more fun to design, to make sure that it was like a seamless effects transition like that. So, oh, I guess like it's not fully compatible with what is it, the like RenPy's rollback features, so it's like not properly syncing up now. Let's try going back a little bit more and see if it works. No, it's like not working properly now. I just broke it. There we go. Okay. Yeah, so like, I don't know. I loved, yeah, doing this thing with like speeding up the audio, and like, you know, I felt that it was like really creepy and like made you feel extremely frantic during this scene where they're like saying horrible things about each other as well. And like the static coming in. It was just really fun to like design this scene. I had a lot of fun with it. And at this point, they're kind of saying like what they were saying in Act 1, and so it kind of just like zooms through the what is it? Like the protagonist's like, you know, inner narrative, because the scene is messed up to the point where the protagonist like is not really involved anymore. So it kind of just like zooms past that. Oh my god, the loop got messed up. That once again probably just has to do with the rollback that I was doing in developer mode. That doesn't happen in the normal game. So initially, you know when you click on one of these, it like zooms in slightly? In like an earlier beta of the game, I did not have that zoom in effect. But I think a couple people were having trouble with understanding that you'd have to like click it over and over again in order to move on. You know, because after some people, after they click it like 3 or 4 times, they're like, okay, it's not working, and they start trying to figure out like possible other things to do. You know, they don't just like desperately click on it like 9 times or whatever. And so you know, the zoom in effect was like a good compromise where again it is something that the game has not yet done before. You know, like literally the entire everything, including the UI, is zooming in, which is very jarring. But it's also, again, making you feel more panicked. And the other cool thing about doing that is when Monica's face appears, it's like dead front and center on the screen, and that was like a lot of fun to do as well. Yeah, so, and also to make that possible regarding like these choice boxes and the way that the game like responds to them, I had to use like features of RenPy that were not just conventional parts of like the script engine. I had to use some, I think, create you know, custom choice box objects or whatever in order to make that happen. And this was fun too, like making Monica's text conform to like make sure it doesn't go behind her sprite. That was like a fun little detail because Monica has control over that, so she wants to like make sure that you're able to read what she's saying. Yeah. So now of course she's like, oh well, you know, like they're just terrible people and let's not get involved. She's really of course just finding excuses to like, you know, be alone with you, and I'd be happy to spend time with you instead of those other like horrible people. And like Natsuki runs out crying, and we never learn exactly what Yuri said to her. I feel so bad for Yuri because she's like so she's so desperate for you to like not hate her, you know. She's so self-conscious about how she comes off, and like this horrible thing that was out of her control just like happened, and now she has to like face you directly and be like, you know, like, please don't hate me for this, like there's something wrong. I really liked doing this too. Like Yuri, like kind of really indirectly trying to convince Monica to like let her just be in the room with you. You know, the characters are probably already starting to lose their trust in Monica for a little bit because there's no way that they can't sense that like something is wrong, you know, but they just wouldn't really be able to put their finger on it because they don't have the same perspective that Monica does. This effect was fun to do as well, since again it was something that happens in the middle of the dialogue rather than like prompted by a mouse click. And also that sound effect there was one that I lowered its volume in like a later patch because I accidentally made it like much louder than normal game audio. I don't think it was louder because of its like amplitude. I think it was louder just because of the type of waveform that sound is, like just makes it sound louder because it's like so sharp sounding. And so I had to like lower its amplitude to make it a little bit more in line with the rest of the game audio. This is one of the earlier fun effects that I added when I was like finding ways to mess with the poem minigame. I think it has a 1 in 200 chance of one of these appearing, but of course that's like times 10 because there's 10 words on the page. So that was definitely a fun one to add, and it's something that the player has control over. It's like, are they curious enough to click on it despite them knowing that like something bad is probably going to happen, or are they like too scared and they can avoid it? So it's like you're expecting something unexpected to happen when you click on it, you just don't know exactly what. So it was fun to design this. And this like messed up Yuri sprite, like once I you know, like with the hopping at it, it's so creepy that it's like still hopping. It's actually kind of gross looking, and it's like just really really uncomfortable. I love it. And then you know, the sound effects here, it's like sometimes there is sound, sometimes there isn't sound when you click on these, and there's like another like weird sound that only has a small chance of happening, for instance. So it was just like really fun to design this effect, and I think I made it so that it can only happen once as well. And there are a couple of other screens that have a small chance of happening at the end of the poem minigame as well, to once again like throw off, you know, break another rule that, you know, the poem minigame like fades out and the next chapter starts. Thank you for joining, Rebel Shifter. It was interesting to see how, like, Natsuki and Yuri being fully in-universe, like, kind of react to, like, the weirdness that's going on, like, based on how they perceive it, you know? Just, like, not really understanding exactly what's wrong or like why they said or did certain things that's like out of their control. And of course the protagonist, like it was deliberate to, as the chapters progress in this act, the protagonist has less and less dialogue because he is no longer becoming like a relevant part of the game at all. You know, Monica is trying more and more to directly reach the player. And so the protagonist like loses his role, and thus does not really have any dialogue anymore. That's also the reason that the protagonist doesn't react in the same way that like Natsuki and Yuri do to like the weird stuff that's going on, because the protagonist like is not a real character. He is basically just like the convenient pieces of dialogue that allow, you know, that serve as you know, serve as just self-insertion for the player. So the protagonist himself is not really like, you know, the same type of in-universe character that Natsuki and Yuri are in that sense. This is fun to do as well, like making Natsuki forget about the events of the other day. Because, you know, I think Monica did that because she knows that, like, she can't make Natsuki and Yuri hate each other to the point where the club cannot continue. One, because, like, that would probably seize the progression of the game, which would foil Monica's plans, and two, like, Monica still cares about the club to some degree, you know? Because she can't, like, you know, it's something that is still a product of her passion, and it's, despite her change in perspective, it's something that is, like, probably always going to mean something to her. And this is fairly similar to Act 1 when she talks about practicing piano. But there's one difference here. In Act 1, she says that, like, she's only just started playing, and in Act 2 she says that she's been practicing for a while, which is a very, very subtle nod to the fact that time is passing differently for her. And she makes a more direct reference this time around to that. She's like writing a song, because of course she is writing a song for you. So there are a couple of Natsuki-related things that I added in a later update to the game after it was released, because I wanted there to be a little more differentiation between, like, selecting Natsuki versus selecting Yuri in Act 2. Before the update, it was kind of unfair that in going for Natsuki, you didn't really get, what is it? So after the first chapter, when you get Natsuki's exclusive scene and you get that scare with her, there was no reason to once again go for Natsuki the second time. Like, that next poem minigame just didn't matter at all, and I thought that was kind of unfair. And so I wanted to reward the player, or, you know, give them something different if they continue going for Natsuki, you know. Or that's, let me see, that's not entirely accurate, because I think if you go for her again, you get, like, the neck snap scene. I don't remember the exact triggers for that, but my point is that, like, if the player likes Natsuki that much more than Yuri, that they would, like, want more content with her, then I felt like they deserved to have a little bit more content, despite you being, like, forced onto Yuri's path during Act 2. And so this was one of the, you know, one of the things where the protagonist is like, oh, but, like, you know, I should be spending time with Natsuki or whatever. Yuri's like, she's fine, she's reading over there. Don't think about her, she's used to being ignored. It's the you know, the sad irony is that the way in which the game hints at her like facing a lot of neglect in her personal life, she is also being neglected by the game, you know, because you get forced onto Yuri's route and you don't get to like really spend time with her despite wanting to. And if you try going for Natsuki, Yuri and Monika, this is like after I updated the game, like they're actually meaner to her as a result. Because that's kind of like in a way that's partially like how you learn a little bit more about her, and is another way of you know, I guess making fun of the player, like making the life of the character more miserable that like you're trying to go after. I don't know. So this was fun too. Like we didn't play through Yuri in Act 1 in this playthrough, but like if you're familiar enough, her description of the book changes based on like Act 1 or Act 2 to like make Yuri's interests sound like a lot more uncomfortable in Act 2, or more suspicious, that like she's like, you know, like interested in like really weird stuff. So that was like a lot of fun to do. It was fun. It was fun to have those lines of dialogue automatically advance without you clicking the mouse, and then them either not appearing in the history or just like the normal version appearing in the history instead. Looking at, oh yeah, that was an effect I added, I think, a little bit later on in development, and that was an instance where I forgot that I added that effect. So when I was playtesting it, like, it actually startled me when it happened. But yeah, looking at the time, I actually am not sure if I'll be getting through the rest of the game tonight, you know? I didn't realize there was like so much for me to talk about like during Act 2, but yeah, there's some things that I'm going through really slowly just because I feel like I have so much to say. And you know, I won't be able to like go too late into the night, so I might just have to do a third stream to finish up. So most of this is the same as Act 1. That is obviously not the same. It's so fun to like design these cute little scenes with Yuri where like you have an excuse for the characters to like scooch closer together and like, you know, hold the book in like these intimate ways and stuff like that. And this, of course, is different from Act 1. In Act 1, she's like, oh, what do you mean that I relate to the protagonist? But Act 2, she, like, all of a sudden gets, like, really defensive, as if she, like, you know, she, like, has read this book before, so she knows that, like, you know, there's probably, like, something really wrong with the main character in the book, and she's instantly like, no, I don't relate to this character at all, like, getting really defensive, as if she's, like, not, you know, really insistent that she's not, doesn't also have, like, something horribly wrong with her. And she rushes out of the room to get a drink of water or whatever she's doing out there. So this is interesting because the way Monica phrases this when she's like, did something happen just now? Monica obviously knows what's up, but she's almost playing innocent. So she's like, so you don't know anything. From the player's perspective, that's like Monica is saying, like, it sounds like Monica is equally curious to know what's going on, but really Monica is saying that almost as like relief to yourself, where she's like, okay, so you still don't know anything, like, you know, just confirming that you don't know this about her yet. So that phrase like means something different to Monica versus the player. This is also something where I had to like do some gymnastics in the code to like not have, you know, like Yuri's dialogue choice only appear after you talk to Monica first, and other various things about like the way the variables increment here to be based around that. All of the variables for the characters' poem responses and their appeal points based on like the poem minigame and stuff like that, that is all like a huge mess, because that was some of the stuff that I did earliest on in the game code, and I have a habit in projects of kind of like hacking things together until they work, and then going back later and cleaning them up. But like as it gets more complicated, I sometimes just like hack more and more stuff on top of it, and just like, well, it works, so I don't want to touch it. And that's something that happened with the poem responses and like the characters' different variables, where you know, the proper way to do it would have been to assign the variables to like a character object and have like, you know, appropriate data structures for that stuff. But instead I just have like a ton of global variables for like the characters' appeal points and their appeal in the current chapter based on the poem minigames and stuff like that. It's all like a gigantic mess, but it works, so. So, despite me having selected Natsuki again, for the second poem minigame, it defaults to her not liking the poem, because of course, like, you spent time with Yuri and not her, so it's impossible to get her to like your poem the second time. The most she can feel about it is neutral. And then she, like, kind of throws some shade at you for spending time with Yuri. Not that I care. I was taught never to expect anything from anybody. Low-key extremely sad, but, you know. Here we go, baby. This whole part was like, of course, it was very fun to code and fun to write between, I don't know, the visual effects and making Natsuki say, like, creepy stuff. The audio track, in the same way that it fades in the poem minigame, it fades again into, like, an alternative version of, you know, of her poem audio track. that just has like random note, like some of the instruments are just like playing random notes, and there's other like weird sound effects in the background. It was like very fun to do that. That was so much fun. That was so much fun to make because there was a lot that went into that. There was the effects. There was the black rectangles like having to shift their position as her head moves. The animation having her come in front of the text box. The sound effects as well and designing those. Once again, just taking like different public domain sounds and like editing and combining them in interesting ways to get the sounds that I wanted. The whole thing was just like really, really fun to make, and it's definitely one of the effects that I enjoy more. And I'll do it again. You all know I have the rollback ability, so. The footstep noise was like, that was interesting to make too, because I think like I sort of partially took like normal footsteps, but not ones that sounded too realistic, and then I like sped them up a lot, and it's like this it doesn't sound like footsteps, but it's one of those cartoony noises that like does sound like it. I don't know. It was fun to make. Let's go ahead and move on. Yeah, and here Monica like you know, is like meaner about Yuri as opposed to Act 1. Detached from reality, totally given up on people, spends so much time in her own head, starved for social interaction. This, of course, is just a modification of the Save Me poem in Act 1. It's like in the way that her universe starts breaking apart and getting corrupted when you quit the game. As I explained yesterday, it's like the same thing is kind of happening to the poem. Of course, he just sneaks this little thing in the end, because that at this point obviously has personal meaning for Monica. One effect I wanted to do, but I guess just ended up not coding it, was like once you reach the bottom of the poem and it says delete her, I wanted it to be like you scroll back up and like the rest of the poem is just gone, like it's just blank. That would have been pretty cool. At this point, Monica just like gives up on like trying to explain her poems at all, because like she's getting to the point where she like really can't talk about them. So she's just like, I'm just trying to well, never mind. It doesn't matter. There's no point. This was a lot of fun too, regarding, you know, Monica's writing tip of the day. I talked about that a little bit last stream as well, but like how you can like do fun stuff with like, you know, in Act 1 it just sounds like she's like a tutorial character where she's like giving you a tip to save your game. And she's like, what am I talking about? Just silly breaking the fourth wall. It's good comedy in a game, but now it obviously means a lot more than that. And now she's like, she's not laughing about it because she's realizing that the game has given her a chance to talk to the player right here. And so that's why like her demeanor just completely changes, and she's like, can you hear me? Or tell me you can hear me. Because she, like, you know, since the game itself is already trying to reach the player through that dialogue, Monica thinks that she can like actually like take this chance to like interact with the player in a way that is like part of the game. And she's like she's so desperate for that she like really wants to take that opportunity. But of course, the game will have none of it and just takes her right back out of it and moves on with the script. This is where, you know, Yuri is starting to get a little bit obsessive over you. And this poem was like really, really fun to write as well. It's like Yuri is, you know, it's kind of symbolic of the insane, like whirlwind of thoughts and emotions that are like in Yuri's head as she's becoming more obsessive. Before she has gotten to the point where she's just completely off the wall, you know? It's like to the point where it's like influencing her poems, and her poems are becoming like really, just really like kind of abstract and chaotic with like weird, creepy imagery. I really enjoyed writing this. It doesn't really matter what it's about. Oh, she really likes the way that your pen writes. And then you get the next special poem after this. I think originally I just had it happen like at the end of every chapter, but or maybe no, you know what it is? I wasn't able to put it at the end of last chapter because I needed the scene from Yuri and Monica in the classroom arguing immediately snap to the poem minigame, right? Because it's like Yuri glitches out because Monica, like, you know, causes the end of the scene, and then it's like instantaneous poem minigame that was necessary right there. And so the special poem I put here instead. This is a fun little anti-climax or anti-jump scare. You know, people are like afraid to stare at the dot because this is a classic jump scare setup, and so it was just like a cute little thing that I wanted to do. Ooh, this is a rare effect. There's a pretty small chance of this one happening. It was very fun to design. The music just like sounding very muffled and distant. The pulsing veins on the side, I tried to you know, make look like the corners of your eyes, like, you know, being red and veiny. And there's like this disgusting squelching sounds that start coming in. It was just like really, really fun to design this. I wanted to do something here because this piece of dialogue is the same as in Act 1, but we're far enough into the game that like we can be doing some like really weird stuff. So yeah, this was one of the effects that I think I designed a little bit later on, but I had a lot of fun with it. And then it just literally completely fades out, like the audio and everything, and it's only until you click again that it just snaps back to normal. It was so much fun. I think there was someone who emailed me about that effect, saying that people who have certain types of color blindness, with that red overlay, they're like not able to see anything on the screen, and so it's like it ends up being like a negative experience for them because it takes a while to click through that, and so they like don't know what's going on. It was just interesting for me to read and think about, because it's something that I of course like didn't consider when designing that effect. But putting that detail aside, putting that detail aside, I enjoy the like overall design of that effect. So writing the end of this chapter was quite interesting because I needed to put some thought into, given all the weirdness that's going on, and like Natsuki and Yuri like just not really liking things and each other and being in like a tense mood. It's like, you know, what's this going to mean for the club? You know, it's like Natsuki already feels like so I guess neglected by the club that she's like, you know, she tries having more of like a voice here, and it causes some strife between the club members. But like, you know, she's kind of just like telling it how it is right now. For like, you know, Monika's really the only one who like cares that much about the club, you know? It's like the player and the protagonist care more about the girls, and, you know, Natsuki has her preferences, and like, you know, who knows what Yuri wants. Oh, this was good. If I remember, you weren't even given a choice not to join. Monika has not she has not spent that much time like very directly and deliberately breaking the fourth wall. But this is a statement that is kind of like, it's like more direct. It's a little more difficult to interpret in other ways. The other interpretation, like in universe, would be that like everyone kind of guilted / manipulated you into joining the club, and so you weren't like given a choice in that sense. But she obviously very literally means the game did not give you a choice. So yeah, Monika's like she's probably been feeling this way a lot recently, but like Natsuki sort of brought it to the surface, like you know, Monika feeling like really dejected, and that everything that she's doing is meaningless, and that she won't be able to get what she wants in the end, both with the club and in, you know, achieving her her romance with the player. Yeah, so it's, you know, it's what I was saying earlier, where despite everything that's going on, like Monika still cares about the club in general. You know, it's still like something she was passionate about, like starting the club for what it is. So it makes sense for her to care about the club on that level, but maybe she also wants to get new members so badly because she thinks that there might be more potential new members that are like the player. You know, and she'll have more of a chance to reach out to the universe outside her own. These visual effects, aside from them being pretty fun to design, I wanted a way to show both sides of Yuri, I think. Because I wanted this scene to like play out fairly seriously, like in universe, because one, it's kind of important for the progression of the plot of what's going on in Act 2 regarding like the festival and stuff like that. But you know, I also wanted to show like Yuri's increasingly crazy side, and the best way of doing that was through these visual effects, I think. You know, as if you're like getting a glimpse inside Yuri's head for these brief moments. Yeah, now Monica is jumping in. Monica's probably not really being sincere right now. I think she's just trying to get on Yuri's good side again in order to convince her to leave the club room so Monica can have a moment of alone time with the player. Monica at this point doesn't really have any reason to be sincere with the other characters because she probably fully believes that the other characters are just like, you know, like autonomous and not real in the way that the player is and in the way that Monica sees herself as. Yeah, Monica is trying a little bit harder here to directly reach the player. She's like getting more desperate, and she's becoming less afraid of breaking the fourth wall and trying to like ease into it. She is ready to kind of reveal everything here, I think. She's just trying to like lead into it rather than dropping the bomb. But there's something in the game script that probably like understands where the end of each chapter is, and so the game, you know, progresses. Like the game reaches the end of the chapter despite Monica having more to say, and so it doesn't allow her to finish her thought, and she just very sadly fades out while trying to stop the game from doing so. It's at this point where I don't think this poem minigame has any effect at all on like the outcome of the next chapter. But I tried to come up with more like interesting ways to like break the poem minigame, and of course this up here was one of them that was fun to do, and the occasional like Monica jumping at the bottom just out of complete randomness, as if she's like trying to force her way in yet another way. So that was just like some fun stuff that I did with this. Let's see. I would say this is a pretty good stopping point for tonight. We can definitely finish up in a third stream, which I think I would like for it to happen tomorrow, but I might actually need to put it off until Tuesday because I have a lot of obligations tomorrow. But I'm very glad that so many people were able to stick around for this second stream as well. I've been having a lot of fun, and I hope you have been too. I think like once Act 2 started, I was just like, I was so eager to like talk about so many things, because just as I play through, I'm like reminded of, you know, all of the development that went into like the stuff that I was doing. So it's a lot of fun to talk about, you know, and fun to see everyone else's thoughts and reactions. I know that I can't get to like, you know, I can't answer every single question that people ask. sometimes I just don't want to answer certain things because like of course as with anything, it's more fun to leave certain things up to speculation, or there's certain things that I don't want to just off the top of my head or like on the fly just add to what people would consider as like the canon because I'm the developer or whatever, you know, stuff like that. So there are some instances where I deliberately choose not to answer a given question, so I apologize for that. But you know, aside from that, it's been really fun seeing what everyone else thinks of this. Monica mains Fox. There was a back like October of last year. There was a tweet on the Team Salvato Twitter account about who each of the characters would main in Melee, and it was basically like Yuri like mains Marth because she feels like a personal connection with him. Natsuki mains Pikachu because like Pikachu's like, you know, cute, like Natsuki likes cute things, but she can't be so deliberately cute as to pick Jigglypuff because like she needs an excuse to pick a character that's like cute but pretend that that's not why she's like picking the character. So she like picks Pikachu. And then Sayori says she likes to play as all the characters except for the scary looking ones, but if she had to pick like a main, it would be Yoshi because she wants to ride on Yoshi's back. And then Monica just mains Fox because she like did her research and saw that Fox is like the best character, so she just like mains Fox because of that. Oh my god, more DK rap. I don't know what's with you guys and doing that. Oh yeah, I Taco Guy, I totally forgot to talk about the opening lines when you like start the game. And there's like a 1 in 4 chance of getting a different opening line or a disclaimer. And how one of them is PM died for this. That is very obviously a nod to Project M, but I thought it was funny because for people who don't know what Project M is, they have no idea what that disclaimer means, and it sounds like it could be a person's initials or something like that, so saying PM died for this sounds a lot more ominous than it actually is, which is literally just like a Smash meme. So I thought that was like such a like a funny thing to add from my perspective. The ghost menu, there is, I think there's a 1 in 64 chance of that happening, right? So that is almost a, that is a nod to Uboa in Yume Nikki, because there's a 1 in 64 chance of getting Uboa when you turn off the lights in what's her name, Pochiko, in her room. That's her name, right? Or is it I forget her exact name. Ponako or something like that. So that was like a nod to that. And I you know, the visuals on that screen I also like I designed like while thinking about that using, you know, what is it, one bit images with only white and black, to give it like that similar look. So that's like where I found the inspiration for that. That was kind of like a nod to Uboa, just based on how much Yume Nikki had meant to me. Thank you, Ponygo. I was what is it? I think I messed that up because I was thinking of Pochako from Super Sonico. How did the variant thing happen? That was interesting. I randomly came across one of Shoji's new tracks, and I was like, oh, this is great. I was like looking for 1 or 2 artists to do like a couple of DLC like style or like DDLC inspired or like remix songs for the soundtrack, just to, you know, just add a little bit more to the game soundtrack for people who buy it. So I reached out to Shoji, and Shoji liked the idea, and it turns out Shoji was kind of like friends with Varian. So I met Varian as well, which is really funny because I had heard Varian's tracks like years ago, so I like knew who he was, and based on that, like I became friends with Varian, and so he like added a track to the soundtrack as well. So that was kind of the story behind that. Yeah, Team Salvato is just me right now. The Sayuri image at the end of the poem minigame. That is like, I think, a 1 in 15 chance or something like that. It's like a very small chance. But that was, again, an instance of just like, it's so much fun for just having a very small subset of people like experiencing this one weird effect, and like it just becoming like, you know, when you're like talking with other people about the game, it just becomes like a very special and interesting thing to get like a rare effect, or have that different experience from other people. So it was one of those things that I just had a little bit of fun making like that. Yeah, a lot of DDLC I wrote before I had the art. You know, first I used placeholder art, and then you know, it took like, it was only like many months into development before I like settled is not the right word, but before I like hired Satchely to make the final art. But before then, like, it was just, I was mostly writing Act 1 stuff, and so it was like, it wasn't hard to write the story without having like the final art, because that's like, you know, remember, like, my perspective of the characters was like, my introduction to them was based on like my design and their writing and their personalities, and not like their picture first appearing on the screen. Oh yeah, the Sayuri mouse pointer. I just you know, when I was thinking of all the different interesting things that I could mess with in the game, I noticed like Ren'Py allowed you to set a custom mouse pointer, and I was just like, I need to do that for one of the effects, because that's just like another really interesting layer outside of the game to mess with. So that's where I got that idea. That was like really fun to do. Composing Your Reality, the game's theme song came first, and after I had the theme song, I was able to start working on lyrics for it just based on the melody, and then I was able to from there I was able to create the final song, Your Reality, based on what I had in mind for it, instrument wise. The fake blue screen, what I was talking about a little bit earlier in this stream, when about how, like, you know, things going wrong with computers is like scary. It probably felt very natural for me to add that like fake blue screen, just based on that. It was fun to design because the way blue screens happen in Windows 8 and later is, it doesn't instantly appear. It appears like kind of in several blocks, and so I had to like animate that in Ren'Py as well to make it look authentic. And I don't know if people like fell for the blue screen or how many fell for it, but regardless, it was still just like a fun and cool visual effect to do. And I designed it so that it only happens if you're playing in Windows, so like not on a Mac, and it only happens if the game is in full screen. So that makes it even, like, that makes it just that much less likely for people to run into, because it only happens when the game is full screen. So that's just another interesting tidbit about it. How did I find the voice of Monica? I had a few people in mind, but what it came down to was like, of course, the most important aspect of her voice was like how she sounds when she's singing, and I wanted her to like, be like a good singer. So like I wanted someone who was like, kind of trained in like music or voice. But the other interesting challenge was I didn't want her to sound like a super professional. I wanted her to have kind of like the cutesy side of her voice, and so there were certain singers who do like singing for like have done singing for like musical theater and stuff like that, or like more like jazzy stuff where like the way that they sing wasn't fully what I was looking for. And so I finally out of everybody I was considering, I went with my best friend's cousin, who has a lot of experience with music and has a great voice. But she was also a great fit because she was around Monica's age, and so like her voice naturally sounded like that age character, as opposed to other more professional singers who were like in their 20s and they sounded a little bit more like an adult. So it just like ended up working out. She had like a really amazing like voice for it. So I'm quite happy with how that turned out. But a lot of that was like I was giving her a lot of direction as well, because of course in my head I had like an idea of how I wanted certain phrases to be, certain phrases to sound in like singing and the way the inflection works and stuff like that. And so there was like quite a bit of re-recording, both in the song and in her little voice monologue beforehand, to make sure that it was like that it sounded like the way I did in my head. It was a very fun process. Yeah, if you want Monica and Blaze Blue, you gotta talk to Arxis about that. Parfait Girls was like the made-up manga series that was just like the moe slice of life that Natsuki likes to read. Or maybe there's also like some drama in there. I don't know. It just felt like nice and nice and like generic, and that's about it. There's not much to talk about regarding the fonts. I just found ones that I felt were like appropriate for the different uses in the game. Yeah, regarding the game being satire, although it is something I talked about before, just to kind of summarize that, the game, when the game is like aimed at, like this Western anime culture where people love, even people who love anime love to make fun of it, the game is so obvious in being like a generic dating sim in Act 1 that it becomes a satire in that context, because it is asking the players to make fun of it in a way, being kind of aimed at or designed around that Western anime culture. It's like, despite the game not really making fun of itself in Act 1, it's kind of indirectly asking players to make fun of it. And so in that way, it's like a satire in that way. Yeah, Monica's name is like not a Japanese name because she's designed to like stand out. You know, there's something different about her, and that kind of shows in her name as well. Oh yeah, you know, Monica's topic in the space classroom where she like starts talking about Smash. Yeah, that's because like I have a history in the Smash community. A lot of my work was in like modding Smash, working on Project M and 20XX Tournament Edition, so it was like a big part of my history as a developer. But of course the game blew up, and you know, I just added that in there as like a joke for the Smash community because naturally like a lot of them know me and they're going to be playing my game, so it was like a joke for them. But then the game obviously blew up to be much larger than that, and I was getting tweets like every single day asking about like why Monica started talking about Smash, and I was just like, you know, it was, you know, like its purpose as an inside joke kind of like already played out, so it was just easier to remove instead of like confusing people in that way. I expected people to eventually find every hidden thing in the game, but it happened about 2 days after the game was released. I didn't expect that. It was thanks to a couple of crafty people in the Smash community who kind of worked together to like pull everything apart so quickly. It was extremely impressive. I had a pretty good weekend, thank you for asking. It was a little bit busy, but not bad. I still had some fun. I already saved the game, right? Yeah, there it is. Go ahead and here's the messed up Sayori. How much work was put into the trailer? I spent a pretty good deal of time on it. I had to come up with some like effects that I hadn't done before in like video production. So it was fun to make. I like learned a couple of new things while I was doing it, and I tried to take inspiration from other like generic visual novel trailers as well. Yeah, I would say that's about it for tonight. Don't worry, because I will be back. If not tomorrow, then Tuesday. I'll let you know tomorrow, like where I am with my other obligations. I might get the chance to stream in the evening. Just keep an eye on my Twitter account. Yeah, it was very fun chatting with you all and playing through the game as usual. I will finish up tomorrow. So thank you once again for joining. Get some sleep. And I will see you again in a day or two.